We will conclude the series of presentations with Maxim Velli and Lola Kengen, who will be presenting Solarpunk Science, Transforming Epistemologies for a Regenerative Scientific Practice. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Thomas. One sec. Would be cool if it stopped raining now, right? That I'm presenting something about Solarpunk. Sorry, 1 second, wrong. Yeah. So thank you for the introduction, Thomas. We'll be talking a bit about Solarpunk today, but before we get into that, I just wanted to ask a question to know what kind of an audience I'm addressing now. How many of you are technologists, engineers, or scientists by education and by their job right now? Okay, all right. And don't put your hand down yet. My next question is how many of you actually feel like they can talk confidently about the fact that they do a creative job in their daily life? Okay. Well, some people put their hand up after for the second question. Yeah, now it's working. But this is just to prove a point about the fact that myself also, I feel really uncomfortable talking about the fact that as an engineer, I do a creative job. And it seems that among us here, but also at large in society, we have some sort of a problem about compatibility of technical rigor with creativity. And before I head into the rest of the presentation, I just want to discuss when it starts. And the thing is that it starts really early on. And most of you with a technical inclination probably know how it goes. You know, you're good at math, you're good at science, so you become a nerd. And when you become a nerd, well, you might have some problems with your social life, but at the same time, in society, that's kind of appreciated. You are incentivized to become an even nerdier person because then you can be of most use for society. Why would you be interested in becoming like a well-rounded person that is embedded in the context and the philosophy of your culture, etc., etc.? You just become a nerd and you specialize even further. So for the sake of this presentation, I would like to ask a what-if question. You know, what if this was not the case? What if we respected the technical rigor just as much as we respected the creative output of our technologists, engineers, and scientists? And this is great to be giving this presentation after the toolkit because perhaps this is another thought experiment that we can engage in to understand the meaning of such frameworks. So the first what-if question is about schools, because that's where our engineering education starts. And the thing is that our schools are made for us to compete with one another, not to collaborate. They're made for us to do tests and to perform on academic rankings to ultimately get into the best schools where we specialize even further in our nerdy disciplines. So what if this was not the case and instead our schools were more of community spaces where we had the opportunity to engage both in horizontal learning and in vertical learning so that our students from day one that they become part of society feel like they are contributing meaningfully to it? And if we then proceed to the universities, we can imagine what our universities would look like if they were not also just spaces where we had this one-sided, huge auditorium education where we're taught how to perform the job that we ultimately will be doing. Because instead, we can envision that universities would look more like something that doesn't have majors and minors, but instead where people come together to explore particular problems, real tangible problems in the outside world. And they just spend a few years exploring how to tackle these problems from a variety of angles. On the go, collaborating with people who are more interested in anthropology, in science, in the art, in computer science, but ultimately to contribute to solving these urgent, present problems that we have in society at the moment. And finally, probably the saddest part is when we get out of these universities and we engage in something that we're going to be doing for the rest of our lives. So we're going to be working. And the thing is that academic research usually is governed by the publish and perish concept, as well as short-term funding cycles, which were poignantly addressed today in the morning meeting. But what if our work didn't have to look like this? And what if we didn't restrict ourselves to asking the question of can we do this, but also should we do this, and for who are we doing this? What if our work was deeply entangled with the communities that we're a part of, and perhaps in these kind of in this kind of a world, the prestige of a researcher would not be determined by the H index, but instead by the actual meaningful impact that they're delivering for their communities and their environments.
All of this sounds great, right? You just witnessed a scientist desperately trying to understand where things went wrong and how to fix that. And the series of what-if questions that Maxim just shared with us, it relates to this concept that comes to us from the field of utopian studies that is called the education of our desire. So educating our desire is about breaking away from this logic of no alternative. It's about questioning the limitations that we are presented as immutable, turning to the epistemologies that help us prove otherwise. And it's about practicing this speculative thinking and turning to radical hope, the belief that things could be different. So how do we educate our desire?
Lower one.
The lower one, okay.
Yeah.
The one?
Yeah.
So how do we educate our desire? If you don't really know where to start, the Solarpunk movement is all about reclaiming this hope for more desirable and livable futures, a hope that we've all been stripped away from. And Solarpunk started as an aesthetic on Tumblr in the 2000s, with people started to depict worlds in which humans lived in harmony with nature. And as you can imagine, as people started having these visions, they necessarily started to think about the kind of politics and social structures that would be conducive of such reality. And in the tradition of all the punks, steampunk, cyberpunk that came before it, the punk in Solarpunk refers to this thing that now being hopeful in a world where doomerism and pessimism prevail is punk. And as for the solar, it refers to the movement's interest in renewable energy sources and decentralized infrastructures. But let us be clear that Solarpunk is not a blueprint for us to follow. It is what can be what is called a memetic engine. So it's a kind of force that propagates cultural ideas and shapes worldviews. And Solarpunk does so by making us envision a desirable outcome for the future in contrast to other possible and often more dystopian narratives. It's a productive imaginary force for us to act in the present. And despite utopias and dystopian narratives being two sides of the same coin, dystopian and post-apocalyptic narratives dominate our mainstream culture. And we believe that this imbalance is a problem because we need cultural references that make us critically think about avenues for change and not solely highlight problems. Because our world resembles too closely the dystopias that cyberpunk has been warning us about since the 80s. And Solarpunk recognizes the historical link between science fiction and reality and kind of reverse engineers that by inviting us to speculate about desirable futures and the various ways in which they could come to exist. So now that you have an idea of what Solarpunk and memetic engines are, what does this mean for science and technology? Why should scientists and people who are innovating even care about hopeful and speculative visions? First of all, we think that it is important to create spaces and ways for people in science to engage in reflections about their own subjectivity, their values, their hopes, their fears, their aspirations, and put those in dialogue with their work. And this is especially important in domains where the so-called objectivity of the knower is the norm. Second of all, we also believe that although there are different interpretations of Solarpunk, it is a movement that gears us towards knowledges, epistemologies, and methodologies that are often overlooked or have been historically dismissed in some Western scientific practices and communities, such as Eastern and indigenous knowledge, or even humanities or social sciences. And Solarpunk can be a conduit for them, for scientists to get curious about those other ways of knowing. And lastly, Solarpunk can help provides like a reason for scientists to critically reflect on whether the technologies and the kind of knowledges that they produce ultimately leads to a desirable future. So are they accessible? Are they empowering? Are they convivial? And we believe that by creating their vision of a world they desire for themselves and for others, scientists can might become more motivated to attain it, and ultimately gaining agency and acting more responsibly to fulfill their vision. Thank you very much.
Thank you.